sound is coming through. That's all good. And it's good to see all you people here. It's really nice. And I think we're set because we're going to be talking about creation, coming from Creation Ministries. And we're going to be connecting it that creation is actually a key to the gospel. Many people think that creation's a side issue, that we focus on the gospel, which is good, but it's actually got a foundation, and creation is the foundation. And the New Testament writers, that's the way they began as well. Do you ever get a message, like come through through your messages, or maybe an email, which is sort of really is discouraging or sort of upsetting, that you get something comes through, a message? You ever get an upsetting message? But the same message is also very encouraging. Same thing at the same time. Well, I got a message from a guy by the name of Michael some time ago. And there's part of it which was really I found really annoying and upsetting. And part of it which I thought was really encouraging. And what it was is that he shared something of his journey to do with creation. And he said, I encountered evolution in my youth, as most young people do. It doesn't take you any effort to encounter evolution. So he encountered evolution, and he said, this was a very big stumbling block to my belief in the Bible. And that's the same with so many young people today, so many people today. So that's what I found was really distressing. I felt really annoyed that right throughout our culture, that's the way it is. Young people encounter it in their youth, and they get derailed, they get immunized against the Bible. And so I found that upsetting. But then he goes on to say, he said, I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior at 47. So he found evolution was a big stumbling block, and in his search for God, he was searching for God, and he didn't feel that the Bible had anything to offer because of evolution. And so that's why creation is really a key to the gospel. And so I was really excited that he came to know the Lord, he said, at 47 years of age, and which was really cool. So there's a verse which ties into this about us being prepared. And in 1 Peter, the Apostle Peter explains to us, he says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. So we have a hope. We have a hope in Christ. Is it based on wishful thinking? Do you have a good reason for it? If somebody asks you what it is, I know Philip does. He gives good answers, don't you, when people ask you for the hope that you have? He says, but do this with gentleness and respect. So I'm sure that folk here at New Beginnings, that you've been practicing to do this, to be able to give an answer, and that's part of the teaching. And that's what we want to do at Creation Ministries. So some of the things that can help you to be able to give an answer is Creation Magazine. And does anybody here get Creation Magazine? Of quite a few people do. And so that's something that really helps to give us an answer. And then another thing which is we've provide is a website called creation.com. And it's actually a very complicated name, don't you think? Creation.com. Where would you go to find out about creation? Creation.com. And so we encourage people to learn that or remember the site if they got questions. And questions come up from all sorts of situations. If you've got questions about things, there's a little search box there. You just type in your question, and it'll answer you. It'll give you answers, articles to read, and it'll help you. We get so many. There's a couple of 100,000 people, or tens of thousands of people a day access creation.com for answers. And the other thing is that you can get information sent to you by email, and it's the email news. Does anybody get the email news? A few people do. Do you find it helpful? And it just gives you a summary of what articles are around, and you can select which ones are there. Did you get a little, as you came in, did somebody give you a little slip like that? So what I'd just like to ask you to do is to find that, get that out, and turn it over and fill out the back so that you can get the email news. You just turn it over and you just fill that out. Bill Smith, don't put Bill Smith, put your name there and fill it out, and you'll be able to get your email news, put your email and also your postcode, because we're able to let you know when things are on in your area, which is why there's so many visitors here today. And so creation is a key to the gospel. And how do we know that? It's because the gospel starts with Jesus Christ being the creator. He is the creator. And so when we look at Colossians 1:16, which is one of the verses of many verses in the New Testament, which talks about creation, we read there that by him were all things created. By who? By Jesus. Jesus Christ is the creator. All things, it goes through some of the all things that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions, principalities or powers, all things were created by him. And all things were created for him. So we were made for him. So that's the start of the gospel. So where do you go to find out about creation? Well, it's a start, isn't it? You go to the beginning and you open up there at Genesis chapter 1 and here, and it's got about creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, Genesis chapter 1. And it says there, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So I grabbed this Bible today. What is it? It's a New King James. So I like that. That's good. So the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Darkness was on the face of the deep. And then God said, let there be light. And there was light. I love that, don't you? God said, let there be light. And there was light. How many millions of years did that take to come? God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the word day there, God called the light day. Is that a literal 24-hour day? Who said no? You said no. What? You said it's not a 24-hour day. What is it? Oh, it's a period of light. So it's a word day, doesn't always mean a literal 24 hours day, does it? It's the period of light. So the word day can have two different meanings. And it says the day he called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So there was evening and the morning were the first day. So is that word day there, is that a literal 24-hour day? It is, isn't it? Because there was an evening, that was a period of darkness, and then there was morning, the period of light, the darkness and light together, first day. So that's not amazing, eh? And so that's where you find out about creation. Do you think God is big God? Do you think he's an orderly God? He is, isn't he? He created in an amazing way. And we put up a little slide about it, about how God created in 6 days from Genesis chapter 1. The first day, create light from darkness, and there was light. The second day, the firmament. The third day, there was water all over the earth, and God said, let the waters be gathered together into the one place. And it was so, and the dry land appeared, and he called the waters the seas, and the dry ground he called the land. And then God said, let the dry ground bring forth vegetation. And so, isn't that cool? So that was the first living cells there on day 3, when God created the vegetation on day 3. And I really love the way in another place, I think Genesis chapter 2, it says that God created all the plants, the trees which have got good for food. And he says the tree has got, the tree had the fruit on it. And in the fruit there was seeds. So it was all together. So what came first? The tree or the seed? They both came at the same time, didn't they? You can't have a tree without a seed, and you can't have a seed without a tree. So God created them all at once. And then he created the vegetation that's really nice to look at. So that was on day 3 and different things. And, you know, I like to play little games with young people at primary school. If I get into a primary school class, and I'll say something like, you know, so when did the kangaroos first appear on the earth? And some kid will put up his hand and say, yeah, when was it? He said, oh, day 6. Day 6. But the Bible doesn't talk about kangaroos, doesn't mention kangaroos. Where do you get the idea that kangaroos appeared on day 6? And he'll say, it's a land animal. Ah, so all the land animals are created on day 6. And so, and then we go on a little bit playing the game about when did the elephants first appear on the earth? It was day 6, same reason. And so what about the dinosaurs? When did the dinosaurs first appear on the earth? And someone put up their hand, day 6. Because the land animals, see, it's a land animal. So all the land animals, God made them on day 6. And then I'll say, so what else appeared on day 6? Someone will put up their hand and they'll say, the first people. And I say, yeah, that's right. God created the first man and the first woman on day 6. I say, so that means that people and dinosaurs lived at the same time, doesn't it? And you can see their little brains ticking over. They've all heard that dinosaurs died out millions of years before people came around. And they'll say, no, it doesn't mean that at all. That's called, functional dissonance or something like that, where you got 2 different worldviews at work, and it just sort of creates a bit of confusion. So that's really cool, isn't it? And so that, I don't know if that's going to happen today, if, we get presenting the sort of starting with the Bible, and that might create a bit of dissonance, and you just have to just go with it and just see how it works. And God created the first people on day 6. And so what he did, of course, he had a look at all the animals that he'd created, and he saw, wow, those look nice. I think I'll do a bit more work on those. And he took it and he modified it and he created the first people. Is that how he did it? No, that's not how he did it, is it? That's what we learn about, don't we? About how apes are modified and turned into people. But the Bible doesn't say that. It says that God started with the dust of the earth, fashioned a man. And then he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living soul. So he created the man. And interesting, he said, let us make man in our image, to rule over the earth, to be the ones that takes charge of the earth, to the one who's the stewards of the earth. Let us make man in our image. So God gave the earth and the rulership of the earth to man. The first man was Adam. And it says in Luke that, that goes through the genealogies, the son of Adam, who was the son of God. So Adam was the son of God. And so Adam started to rule. God was encouraging him, teaching him how to rule over the earth. And so the first thing they did was they named the animals. That's a way of ruling, isn't it? And when my daughter had a baby, they took a long time to name their children. And my wife would say, have you got a name yet? And no, we're thinking about it, we're working on it, and they might take 2 weeks to name the child. So I think when they had about their 3rd child, a 4th child was a boy, and they were still working out a name. And his older brother got impatient, and he said, well, I'm going to call him Tintin. So he gave him the name of Tintin, and my daughter was not very happy about that. It sort of stuck, because it was their prerogative to name the child, because they were ruling, weren't they? They had the authority to name them. And Adam had the authority. God gave him the authority to name the animals. And it says whatever name that Adam called the animals, that was its name. And God didn't name the animals. And so there was Mr. Dog and Mrs. Dog and Mr. Rabbit and Mrs. Rabbit, and there was Mr. Giraffe and Mrs. Giraffe. I don't know how long it would have taken Adam to figure it out, but he realized that there was not a Mrs. Adam. Is that right? And so what God did, of course, he then took the dust of the ground and he fashioned a woman. Is that the way it happened? No, he didn't. He actually took something that he'd already created. So the Bible can describe that, how God does that, and he did it in the case of Adam. He put him in deep sleep and took from his side, a rib from his side, and fashioned a woman. And I haven't got a picture here of Adam seeing Eve the first time. And if you actually check the Hebrew, you just check it out, you sort of read it out. It says that when Adam awoke from his sleep, he said, wow. Actually, I don't know if that is in the Hebrew, but there you go. And so he said, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Isn't that cool? So God made a man and a woman, Adam and Eve. And, there's a bit of confusion today about what marriage is, isn't there? It's ridiculous anyway. But God made it that way. And so Adam and Eve got to rule over the earth. There's a famous scientist called Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he's an astrophysicist. That sounds impressive, doesn't it? And an astrophysicist would know a lot of things, wouldn't he? Wouldn't they? Do you reckon they would? A physicist knows a lot, and an astronomer knows a lot, but an astrophysicist would know just about everything, wouldn't they? And so people ask this guy sort of big questions, and this is Neil deGrasse Tyson. He appears on TV. Has anybody seen him or that? I think he's still around. You've seen him. Yeah, so we've seen him. People of our vintage have seen him. But Neil deGrasse Tyson. And they said, one of the questions that they ask him is, do you believe in a higher power? Because that's people want to know. Like, he's an important man. He knows a lot. And if he believes in a higher power, then, that would count for a lot, wouldn't it? And so they ask him this. And you know what he said? He said this, if I can find what he said. But he said this. He said, well, he's very tactful. You don't get on TV by dropping clangers, do you? And so he's quite tactful in the way he answered. And he said, every account of a higher power that I've seen described, of all religions that I've seen, include many statements with regard to the benevolence of that power. That this higher power is benevolent, is kind. And he says, but when I look at the universe as an astrophysicist, and all the ways the universe is trying to kill us, he says, I don't see evidence that reconciles with the idea that there's a benevolence out there. And he did a YouTube cartoon about a little YouTube thing, and he's got all the ways that the universe is trying to kill us, with volcanoes and the tsunamis and earthquakes and tornadoes and asteroids. And so that was his picture as though there can't be any sort of a God, certainly not the ones that I've seen described. And you might have encountered people like that don't believe in God, because how can there be a good God when there's so much bad things in the world? And, if I was talking to Neil deGrasse Tyson, I'd sort of say, well, Neil, what you got to do is you're thinking in two different sorts of ways. It's a bit like that boy with the dinosaurs, remember? Dinosaurs and people on day 6, they lived at the same time. It didn't make sense to him. And it doesn't make sense to Neil deGrasse Tyson either, because he's thinking in terms of evolution over millions of years. And so the idea that there's a good God, he doesn't see it in the world with all these things that have happened. But I'd say, Neil, you got to look at it. The Bible explains why it's like that. And it's because the first man and the first woman took the fruit that God commanded them not to take. And as a result of that, it changed everything. Death came into the world. There was separation between God and man. There was a curse placed on the earth. It affected the relationships in the family. It affected everything. And we read there in even the New Testament, it says, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, so death passed upon all men, for all have sinned. And so Neil, at the beginning, there was nothing that was trying to kill us. There was no death. There was no suffering. There was no disease. But now we live in a different world. And in Romans chapter 8, verse 22, we read that the whole of creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And it is. We live in a broken world. We live in a broken world. And it's because of sin. That's the cause. And that's why Jesus came and what he did with the gospel. And that's God's grace. And so you see, we talked about this boy looking at things from two different directions. Didn't make sense. Well, there's two different directions. And you've got the creation view, the creation way that describes in the Bible. We start with creation. How do we know about creation? Well, God's word tells us. We'd have a clue that something's around just by looking at the amazing design in the world, but we understand about creation because of God's word, and because of creation, that establishes the Creator created, and he made us, he owns us, his authority, and he created a good world. And he saw all that he'd made, and behold, it was good. Actually, he said, behold, it was very good, didn't he? Very good. You all knew that. I could see you going like that. Very good. And God's goodness and man's sin. We read there about Adam and Eve and the effects of that and our need of salvation. So that's the whole, see how it's all connected together? Creation leads to salvation. Creation leads is a foundation. It's the key to understanding salvation in the gospel. Whereas the idea of evolution, which is everywhere in our culture. So how do we know about evolution? Well, it's just people's opinion. Man's opinion, it probably should have been M-A-N-S, or it would be M-E-N-S, men's opinion. It's just lots and lots of people, lots and lots of men and women who've been sort of thinking about this and making up stories about how it could have possibly happened. They didn't see it. They didn't go back. Nobody was there looking through a telescope at the Big Bang. So, oh, there it goes. And they kept timing it with their watch. Nobody saw it. It's just a story they're making up. And so it's man's opinion. And if nobody made us, nobody owns me. I do my own thing, I'm my own authority. And bad things in the world, well, that's just the way it is. Just get used to it. And anyway, I'm not a sinner. I'm a good person. And I'm okay. I don't need God, because I don't believe in a God, and I don't need anybody telling me what to do. So you see the two different ways of looking at the world. And when you think about creation and evolution, you know, there's one of these ways which is promoted in our culture. They get equal time, don't they? Would that be right? You know, the TV puts on a little bit about evolution, and then it puts a bit on about creation. Is that the way it goes? What about in schools? They teach about evolution, and then they teach the kids about creation. No, they actually banned it. Many of the states now are banning the possibility of teaching about creation. And even in Christian schools, the government's sort of cracking down, say, if you teach creation in the science class, we'll take your funding away from you. And so there's a battle going on, isn't there? Suppressing the truth, the Bible calls it. Men suppress the truth. They can see the evidence of God because the Bible says it's plain. God has made it plain from what he's made. But people, they reject it and suppress the truth. So I just thought, just very briefly put something up about creation, about what's taught in schools. Because I think it's important for us to know this. You know, we hear a little bit about what's going on in the schools, but the issue of evolution, it's right in there in the schools. It starts, this is a year 10 science book, Oxford University Press. And that's when they start teaching evolution pretty seriously in year 10. But they start in preschool. When they talk about dinosaurs, they start teaching evolution. They teach the evolutionary worldview. And so in this particular science book, it talks about the rise of the bipedal ape. So that's what they're teaching the kids. And the kids are sort of thinking, and I put an X here, and this is a picture. So kids, it's real. We've got pictures of it. We've taken photographs of what they look like. Do you call that, is that science or is that propaganda? It's propaganda, isn't it? They're really trying to sort of influence the kids in a certain direction. And I put an X through it because it's not true. And and it has an impact on young people. Like here's this one say, wow, your science class went for ages. You seem a bit down. What happened? And says, well, the teacher said we're nothing special. We came from pond scum. We're just evolved apes. So, wow, what are they going to be teaching you in your next science class? Self-esteem. Which is true. That's what happens. Now, if you were to come up to Brisbane on the South Bank, I'm sure you're familiar with it. There's a museum there, which is really cool. It's nice to go to. When you walk in, you'll see an amazing dinosaur skeleton. Have you ever seen, anybody been there and seen that? It's incredible, the size of it. And it's got a little sign there explaining about it. It was found at Matabara, and so they called it a Matabarasaurus. They found a dinosaur down here at Coolangatta. What would they call it? Coolangatasaurus or something like that. I don't think they'd find one down here. And the sign there says, it's 100 million years ago. It's been alive for 100, it's been on, 100 million years ago is when the dinosaur lived on the earth. And, I say to the kids in school, I say, what do you notice about the dinosaur? And they'll say, oh, it's standing up on its two legs at the back. I say, yeah, I noticed that. And what else? Anything else? That was not what I was thinking of. And they'll say, oh, it's got its thumb sticking up like that. So yeah, I noticed that, but that's not what I was thinking of. And they say, oh, it's got a big jaw. Yeah, that's right. That you're very perceptive, but I had something else in mind. And then eventually I'll tell them. Somebody might say, but eventually I'll tell them. I say, well, what I noticed, pretty hard to see, but I noticed this, it's dead. Did you notice it's dead? They all laugh just like that too. It's dead. And that's the whole idea of evolution, is that 100 million years. And they x-ray the spines of some of these dinosaurs, not this one, but in other parts of the world, and they find they've got tumors. And these tumors are exactly the same as cancer tumors that humans get. So you got death and cancer. It's been around for 100 million years. And so that's the idea of evolution, is that death and suffering it's actually survival of the fittest, and that's how we evolved. We evolved from apes ultimately like that. But that's contrary to the Bible, and it destroys the foundation of the gospel. It says that death's got nothing to do with sin, because the Bible says in Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord. And that's grace, isn't it? That's the gospel, the gift, the free gift of God, undeserved, unmerited. His gift is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord. And so creation, it's thousands of years, not millions of years. And basically that's the difference as why it's so foundational to the gospel. And of course, the question comes up about these fossils. We got these skulls here, and there's a whole heap of skulls in the other picture, as to how do we explain those? Does the Bible make sense of those? Or do we just have to just believe it, accept it on faith? But it actually does make sense of it, and it's got an event that's recorded in the Bible, early in Genesis chapter, in the early chapters, and it takes a whole 3 chapters to describe this event. So it's a pretty significant event, and it explains to us, puts our world within a sort of understandable, we can understand it. And that, of course, is Noah's flood. And this is a little model that was made by a guy, took it along to this play group. It was actually a vacation Bible school. And here's the kids looking at it. They're very interested in this model that he made of Noah's Ark. The Bible gives the dimensions and a lot of details about Noah's Ark. Not everything. It doesn't got plans, but it's got enough to be able to figure out how big it was. And 140 meters roundabout, 140, 150. And it has 3 decks, a bottom deck, a second deck, a third deck, a window along the top. There's a door, 1 door there. And so this guy's left a bit of exposed so you can see. And the kids are really interested. And they've got a platform going up, a gangplank going up to this particular ark. And it had a capacity, you can work it out, some 15,000 tons, which is not a small boat. If you go down to Point Danger, they've got various boats. Have you seen that around the park? And about the ones that sank during the war, and it's got the sizes of them. I don't think there's any that are greater than 15,000 tons down there. So it's quite a reasonable size, not the largest. And of course, the Bible describes Noah and his family and what he did, and talks about how the animals went on, 2 of every kind of animal, 7 pairs of the clean animals like sheep and goats and birds. And so we did a little trick, our artist did a little trick. So he's got the elephants going on and the giraffes and the monkeys, and he's put in a couple of dinosaurs. And that caused cognizance dissonance or something in people's heads when they see that. I've had, pictures like that, and a lady at a preschool saying, there's dinosaurs going on there. Anyway, so, and then the Bible describes where the water came from under the earth, and then it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, so it came from above the earth. And so that's how the water got here. And the earth's crust moved. So there's lots of movements in the earth's crust, which we still see happening today, just little movements. And that caused a tsunami in 2004. There was a little movement in the earth's crust near Indonesia, and there was 200,000 people died. It was probably not a little movement, but compared to what happened during the flood, it was little, and it was only lasted, a minute or so, and 200,000 people died. And whereas the flood lasted a whole year, movements in the earth's crust, and so that's where the water came from, and that's how the water went away. So you can talk more about that. But then, and every animal that had the breath of life in it died. When you read it in the Bible about the flood, it's sort of a bit like, it's really sad, and there's a gladness about it as well. Gladness that people were preserved and we're here. But it's so sad to see what happened to the earth as a result of the corruption that was on the earth. Every animal that had the breath of life in it perished. Birds, livestock, animals that creep on the earth, they perished in the flood. And so you'd expect to find evidence of lots of animals dying on the earth in a flood, wouldn't you? Well, that's exactly what you find. Evidence of lots of animals dying in the flood and being buried by sediment that's been laid down by water. And that's what happened to this dinosaur, this Metabarosaurus. And clearly it was buried in sediment. And instead of 100 million years ago, it was buried in Noah's flood. And so it had to be buried by a lot of sediment. Otherwise, it would have just rotted away. And you have to, there's people do experiments on this. It's ridiculous, but they do experiments. They put crocodiles in water at the bottom of the river or the bottom of a lake, and they cover them with sediment, and they work out how much sediment they have to cover the crocodile with. in order to keep it buried. Because, you know, as they rot, guess what happens? It fills up with gas. And if there's not enough sediment on it, it just pops out and floats to the surface. So you need a lot of sediment. You need something like 1 meter of sediment. You need a couple of meters of sediment to bury this animal. And so you're talking about a lot of water and covering a big area, bringing a lot of sediment in. And it sounds to me like a bit of a catastrophe, don't you think so? So buried in Noah's flood. You know, my daughter rang me some time ago and about her daughter, which is my granddaughter, and she said, Lily's really upset. She's come home from school. She's so upset about what happened today at school. And so it turns out that they'd started, well, first of all, my granddaughter, is a very keen Christian. She loves the Lord. She shares about Jesus with the school friends. She invites them along to church and to church youth group, and that. So she's very outgoing, and people like her. But anyway, when she came home from school that day, they'd started teaching about evolution and the fossils and the millions of years and all that sort of thing. And I don't know why she didn't know about it, actually. But anyway, it really took her by surprise because it clearly contradicted what the Bible said. And so she was sort of stunned. And not only that, her classmates also could see the connection. And at lunchtime, they'd say, well, Lily, looks like the Bible's not true after all. So they get it, don't they? They get it. And so she came home really upset. And so I basically, my daughter put me on to her, and so I talked to her a bit in very simple ways, and I tried to say, well, you know, they're just making up a story. They're telling you a story that they've made up, and you got to work out what's fact and what's not fact, and it's pretty easy to work that out. And so we had a conversation about it, and she settled down, and she did really well, and she then, you know, she was upset, but once she got it sorted out, the teacher got upset. So when her sister came along and started the science class the following year, the teacher said, are you a religious person too? So that was interesting, wasn't it? So that's the idea, if you know, armed and dangerous, as they say. So how do you work out what's true and what's not true? Well, that's Lily. That's what she looked like back then. And the way you work it out is you ask yourself a question. So you don't have to ask the teacher. You could ask the teacher. Or if you read it in a textbook and you read this stuff, what they're saying, you can ask yourself the question, what do they actually see? What did they actually measure? That's the question. That's as simple as that. What is the evidence is another way I put it. What is the actual evidence for this? And so here's a dinosaur bone. The secret is a dinosaur bone, when they dig it up, it doesn't come with a little label attached to it saying, I'm 70 million years old. Basically, you dig up the bone. And so the bone is the evidence. That's the evidence. That's what you can see. That's what you can touch. That's what you can measure. That's the evidence. And the 70 million years is an interpretation. That's the story. That's the narrative that they're fitting it in. So when you dig up the bone and they say that, you sort of link it together. But you've got to be alert enough to be able to separate it out and say, the bone's the evidence, 70 million years is the story. So if they're just making up a story, how do they get that from? Well, it came out of their imagination. It's from their belief system. That's where it came from. And so if they make up a story, I can make up a story. So, right, I can interpret that evidence within the same, you know, from within a different story. And so once Lily got sort of worked out, understood that, you know, she was away. So the Noah's flood washes away the millions of years. It all happened quickly, and that's why the millions of years are not right. And because it happened quickly. And so we see a lot of evidence of that, like up in Richmond, north of Queensland, somewhere near Mount Isa, between there and Townsville, they discovered, a farmer discovered this plesiosaur, on his property. He saw the skull of it, realized it wasn't a cow, And so he rang the museum, and the paleontologists came out. And you might wonder what a paleontologist looks like. That's what they look like. They're just sort of ordinary people digging up this thing, and they said, you know, there must have been some sort of a catastrophe here. Of course there had to be a catastrophe here. Look how well preserved it is. And it was right up there at Richmond, somewhere in there, and even the bones in its flippers were preserved. And so that's everywhere you go, you see the evidence for Noah's flood. And that's the key which connects us with creation. It goes creation, the fall, the flood, and then Christ, and then us. You know, and so I like to put up this sort of a picture. You look at this little valley here, and we're talking a bit about geology and the idea of, you know, long periods of time. And you look at that, and this valley is a 40th the scale of Grand Canyon. They call it Little Grand Canyon. And if you look at it, you can see there's a little creek. Can you see that? The little creek going through it? And when you look at that, you can figure that out, and you think, that must have taken thousands of years to carve that canyon with that little creek. But you know, it's not actually the case. What happened is that valley, it's something like 30 meters high, that wall. That's fairly high, 50 meters across. But that creek didn't carve the valley. That was carved by a mudslide. It's at Mount St. Helens in the US. And so that was carved in one day. One day. There was a sort of a mudslide, and it released the water, and it went through, and it carved that valley in one day. And so when you look at something, you can get it all wrong because there's something you didn't know about in the past. So that's an example of how things can happen quickly. And so when you look at the Three Sisters, if you go down to Sydney, up in the Blue Mountains, Katoomba, you look out there, and a person who believes, you know, goes to university and believes in millions of years, looks at that and he thinks to himself, a little bit of water over a long time. That's what they think. That's where the millions of years come from, a little bit of water. So he sees the water going down the valley. It's not going very much. But then a person who believes in Noah's flood looks at that and says, a lot of water and a short time. And so that's, as I said to Lily, you got to figure out what is the actual evidence, and then you can make up a different story. And so you go, like, you look at the Three Sisters, and one of the interesting things is just to have a look at how flat it is across the top. Now, how did it get to be so flat? All the same level. And the Bible tells us in Noah's flood, it says the waters came and lifted up the ark, and the waters increased and they prevailed, and it went up until every high mountain under the entire heavens was covered. So the water covered everything, and so it would have covered this area here. And so when it's covering the whole area, the water's over the lot, it planes it all flat. So you got this flat surface there. And so that's evidence of Noah's flood, that flat surface. And then we read how the Noah's flood, we read there how the waters came off the earth, they started to recede, and then eventually the mountains appeared above the ocean, right? They appeared. And then it says the waters continued to go down, and then Noah let out the raven and the dove, and then eventually the waters were gone. So as the waters were going down, basically the land lifted up, the waters flowed off, but you end up with a lot of water going down this valley. See how wide it is compared to the little creek that's in it, the little river that's in it. So that's another evidence, and we see it all over the world, of Noah's flood, these wide valleys and geologists notice that they call it an overfit valley. It's too big for the river. It's too big for the creek. It's overfit. And so that's just one of the evidences for Noah's flood. Did you know that there's some amazing evidence for Noah's flood down on the Gold Coast here? Has anybody seen any of it? You've seen some of it, yeah? Anyone else? You've seen some of it? You've seen some of it? I'll show you. It's sort of going to be a bit rough, but if you go down to Greenmount Beach, is it Greenmount Beach? there, down there. Coolangatta. There's just to, where are we? To this side, there's the life-saving place there. Rainbow Bay, is it? Yeah. So can you see that? So see these rocks. Have you seen the rocks down there? And so these rocks are evidence of Noah's flood. They were laid down during Noah's flood. And so that was early in the flood, you know, when the waters are coming on the earth, the great catastrophe. And as the waters are coming on the earth, they laid down lots of sediment. They washed in sediment, covering a huge area. And so the sediment's a bit like the pages of a book, right? You know, just imagine the pages of a book, layers of sediment here. And so they laid down that. And then what happened, as the flood continued, there was movements in the earth's crust. We talked about that, like the, you know, like the tsunami and the earthquakes, except much bigger movements. And the movements of the crust folded the sediments, right, like that. So it folded them, squished them together, and so they're tipped on their edge and they're folded. And then as the flood continued, it shaved off the sediments there, and it continued with more stuff. And so you can see how these are layers of sediment which have been laid down, and then they've been tipped up. Can you see they're tipped up there? Can you see that? They've been tipped up and they're smoothed off flat. So if you go along, you can see the various little strata that are running along and how they've been tipped up. So that was early in the flood, probably a few months after the flood was going that happened. And then there's a lot of other things that happened, but there's other evidence down there for Noah's flood. And as you come up the beach there, you can see the lifesavers thing, and you can see they've made a wall out of all these black rock, which is the, you know, which is the basalt that's there. And so this black rock was a volcanic rock, which was molten, really, really hot. It would have glowed red, like that does in Hawaii, if you've seen it in Hawaii. And so this is a black basalt, and it forms columns. You can see it's sort of little hexagonal and that sort of thing. They've broken it off there. So this actually, if you walk around a little bit to Point Danger, you can see the black rocks there, very nicely exposed. And if you go down to Fingal, you can see them there. And so this eruption occurred during Noah's flood, later in the flood, probably as the waters were getting towards their peak. And then as the ocean basins started to sink, and the continent started to lift up, all the pressure and the stress caused these volcanic eruptions. And so there's one very famous volcanic eruption. What does anybody know the name of that? Mount Warning, that's right. And if you go to Google, you can see there's a view of it. Does it clear? There's Mount Warning there, right? There's King's Cliff. There's Tweed Heads, there's a Tweed River going out there. Where are we? We're somewhere up here, aren't we? Reedy Creek there. But you can see the eruption from Mount Warning, the lava has gone all the way up Springbrook, and it's gone all the way up to Tamborine. And it's all the way out here. It's gone all the way down here, Nimbin and that sorts of places. So you can see how the eruption the lava has gone out. But you also, so there's Mount Warning there. But notice the gap. Can you see how it's been eroded out like a saucer? Can you see that? And it's like a donut that's been eroded out. And so you've got, this is the Tweed Valley, which is very productive. And so that would have been eroded out. So the Mount Warning would have erupted as the floodwaters were reaching their peak and as they started to go down. And so the ark has come to rest in the mountains of Ararat, and Noah is waiting there, and then it says after a certain time, the mountains appeared. So this would have been sort of around about that, you know, that sort of time. And do you notice this? There's a gap there, see that, right? And there's a river that flows through there. If you've probably traveled there, you've gone on a picnic and that. And so it just goes straight through the edge of the rim, right? And it goes all the way out through to Tweed River. So the way it just goes straight through, it's called a water gap, because there's a gap. So the thing is, why would a river flow through the mountains rather than going around them? That's the question. Why did it go through? Well, it's because it was eroded during Noah's flood. So the waters were covering the whole area, and as the waters went down, they eventually carved this gap through, and the waters went all the way out. So isn't that cool? So next time you see Mount Warning, you'll say, "Wow, that was erupted during Noah's flood." So just put it in. So I don't know. Give you a bit of an interest like that. Try that with your friends. See what they think of that. So, and just one other thing, we talked about, the millions of years, and Noah's flood just washes away the millions of years. But people say, but there's so many things that take millions of years to form, like diamonds. Look at a diamond, they take millions of years to form. How can you say the world is only young? Well, actually, they can form very quickly. There's a company in America called Genesis, and they have got all these steel big containers, and you can see this guy, he's got the lid up, and they put in a steel container inside, and puts carbon in it, and they shut it all up, and they put it under pressure and heat, and within 4 days, after 4 days, out comes a diamond. And so what they say is, we can make diamonds in 4 days, which takes nature millions of years to make. That's funny, isn't it, eh? Actually, what you say is, we show that it doesn't take millions of years to form diamonds, and it wouldn't take nature that long as either. And so creation is a key to the gospel, and we've sort of just tied it in together to show that, creation, it makes sense of the world. And the things that we hear in the world, they throw us off the trail. They derail us. And I like this guy, Kenneth. He sent me an email too, also another similar one. He says, I was raised in the church until my teens. Raised in the church. And before declaring myself, rejecting the church, and declaring myself an atheist agnostic. That's tragic, isn't it? But we do know lots of people, lots of young people like that, don't we? And he says, the creation evolution issue was the number one sticking point for me. How could I possibly believe the Bible, he said, if it gets it wrong from the very start? So where did he get the idea that the Bible got it wrong? It would have probably been the sort of stuff he learned at school, the stuff he watched on TV and all that sort of thing. It's just everywhere. And he just thought, well, it's not right. How can it possibly believe it? And so that's why we just want to say, as parents and as uncles and as aunts, we have the privilege of being able to help, those that we love sort of traverse their way, navigate their way. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope you have. And so I mentioned Creation Magazine, and one guy, Jeremy, said to us, he said, your writings played a big part in me becoming a Christian. He said, my older brother got me a subscription to Creation Magazine. And another guy said he was converted when somebody gave him a magazine. Somebody gave me a magazine. So I've sort of taken up the sort of habit of giving people magazines. I was talking to a guy yesterday, actually, and I had magazines in a bag on my side, little briefcase, and we got talking, and he was involved in geology. He was a consultant in the mining industry, and he asked me what I did, and anyway, it was really interesting. I was just walking along the footpath and got into this conversation, and anyway, eventually thought, oh, will I or won't I? So I offered him a magazine. I said, I got something that, this is the sort of stuff I do. This will be quite interesting to you. It's a Creation Magazine. I showed him the magazine, and I showed him some of the stuff inside. There you go. Would you like that? And he sort of, looked a bit weird and sort of, I don't really want that. And I said, it's not going to bite you. Yeah, I said, you'll find it really interesting. Here, take it. And he took it. So I don't know if he'll read it. Hopefully he will. But who knows? If it's not, not got it in his hand, he can't read it, can he? So, and if he throws it out, somebody might read it anyway. So it comes out 4 times a year, and it's a really cool thing. And I just want to encourage you. I think I'll talk a bit more about how to subscribe to that. But there's the Answers book, which is a really great resource if you're teaching Sunday school or youth group or just look in a family. Answers the sort of questions that people have about radioactive dating and other sorts of things. And you can get an intro pack, the Answers book and Refuting Evolution. So see these wonderful people up the back, Evan and Wendy. They'll be able to sort you out on that. And there's another book that's a little bit heavier, but it's quite good for people if they're, academics, not academic, but they want a bit more meat, and that's The Evolution's Achilles Heels. And then about dinosaurs. We talked about dinosaurs, and that it goes into dinosaurs, and a really, really excellent book, that one. And for astronomy, I really like this one, Our Created Solar System. It's a presentation by a guy who was involved in the military space program in the US. He was an atheist, and eventually through one of his colleagues at work who was shared the gospel with him and challenged his atheism and asked him questions, he actually came to the Lord. And Our Created Solar System. There's a DVD series, great for home group, the Genesis Academy, 12-part series, got a free study guide. So the Creation magazine, so you can actually sign up today. A few people already get it, I see that. But the way you do it, it's very simple. I always think it's just such an easy way to become up to speed. And the articles are simple, and they give you confidence. They give you some sort of confidence and strength inside. And there's a form like that, which Evan or Wendy will give you. Is that right? And so you just fill it in. Does that sound complicated? And you can get the magazine. And if you take out a 1-year subscription, you will be able to get a free back issue, just a little encouragement, so you don't have to wait. Plus, if you take it out a 3-year subscription, you will get that plus a voucher, $15 voucher. So there's a free voucher where you can use it today on any books that are there, free $15 voucher. So creation is a key to the gospel. And we read there in Colossians 1:16, by him were all things created, by Jesus. And all things were created by him and for him. And so, isn't it wonderful? He knows us. He's kind to us. He's provided everything that we need, and he helps us in our troubles when we live in a broken world. He's here to redeem us. So I just want to say thank you for the privilege of sharing with you. All you need to do is just go to the table and say to Evan or Wendy, they'll give you the form and you just can fill it in. It's as simple as that. Thank you. So did you want to do something? You wanted to put me on the spot. Is that the idea? Did you want to put me on the spot? I'm used to that. I'm a married man. You laughed. All the ladies laughed really loudly. I'm finished.
Thank you, Tas. Wasn't that great?
There you go. That's good.
So much today our world is changing so much today, isn't it? We look back a year ago, or a bit over a year ago, and how much it's changed. And I think, as we sang before, Christ our cornerstone, our foundations have to be built strong to enable us to stand. And as we look back and see what God said in Genesis 1. And thanks, Tas, thanks for that. As I mentioned before, we're taking up an offering towards CMI, and those folk that would take up the offering, if they could do that now. And we're going to have a Q&A. If anybody's got any questions for Tas, just put your hand up and I'll hand you the mic and you can ask questions. Anybody got any questions? You want the, you're loud enough?
Carbon dating.
Yeah, it's used, as you know, for giving readings of years. I've heard there's many flaws in it, and it's not an applied science.
So basically, remember I talked about the dinosaur bone and the date on it, and I said the bone is the evidence and the date. Well, why don't they know it's 70 million years old? Because nobody was there 70 million years ago. Nobody saw it happen in the past. So you can't go back into the past and make an observation. Science is about doing observations in the present. So with carbon dating, you actually make observations of carbon-14 in the present. But that's not enough to calculate a date. You need to know how much was in the thing when it formed. And so you can't go back in time to see that or measure it, and so you have to guess. And so the scientists make a guess about what they think was in there when it formed. And they try to make a reasonable guess, a consistent guess, logical, but it's still a guess. And so basically, when they do the calculation, how do they know if the answer's right or not? Well, they look at the number and say, oh, that doesn't make sense. There must be something wrong with that. They'll discard it. Or they'll look at the next number, well, let's do it again. So they do it again. Oh, that looks better. That will work. I'll publish that. So basically, they make guess about what was in the sample when it formed. And so every date that you see, and carbon dating only can give, it can't give millions of years. At the most, it can give 50, 100,000 years, that's all. But so basically, every date that comes out is an assumption. It's a guess. And so there's a free little brochure there called How Dating Methods Work. And it's got a real life example of how they were trying to calculate the date of a skull, and they kept getting the wrong answer. And eventually got an answer which everybody was happy with. And then sometime later, somebody discovered something else and they weren't happy with it anymore. So they went and did a calculation again, and yeah, so they got a different answer and they're happy with that. So it's most people don't realize just how subjective and how much driven by the belief system dating methods are. Yes?
I've talked about the Ice Age, and is there any evidence in the Bible that shows that?
The Ice Age, is there any evidence? Did you make that up or did somebody put you up to it? That's all right. So there's actually an article in here, in this magazine, but we run through a lot of articles about the Ice Age. This one's called Well-Watered Deserts. So it's to do with the Ice Age. But basically, when the Ice Age, when they discovered the evidence of the Ice Age, you find lots of broken rock. They find glaciers. There's glaciers in New Zealand and in Canada and that, and you find the evidence where the glaciers have been, heaps of rock that they push around, broken rock. And so they found that the ice must have covered a much bigger area than what it is now. And that's where the idea of the Ice Age comes from, is that in the past, there was a lot more ice in England and different places. And so that the Bible flood explains it, because to make ice, to make lots of water, get lots of ice up on the land, it's not a matter of just cooling the earth, because if you just cool it, you're just going to get a cold area. You're not going to get lots of ice. You need to have lots of water. And so in the biblical flood, there was lots of volcanic activity. And so at the end of that, when Noah hopped off the ark, the oceans were a little bit warmer than they are today. And so that meant more evaporation, and it created the ice, the precipitation on the land created a lot of ice. It built up for hundreds of years until, you've got ice, quite a number of meters thick, even 1,000 meters thick in different parts of the earth. So that's how the Ice Age formed. People who don't believe, and so it melted back after that as the oceans cooled. There's an article in Creation magazine about that, and there's an article in the Answers book about that. Well-watered deserts, that indicates that the climate was different after the flood, and so there's lots of evidence that deserts, places today, were well watered, and there was lots of vegetation and that's an effect of the flood on the climate after the flood. Now, geologists who don't believe in Noah's flood, they don't know what caused it. And so they think maybe the Earth's orbit changed just slightly, slightly bigger this way or that way or tilted. So, and they call that Milankovitch cycles. And so that's their explanation. But it's not enough to produce an ice age. And so they think, oh, there must have been something else happened, and maybe we're heading into another climate catastrophe. So that's the idea. It's sort of part of the alarm today is caused because they don't really know what caused the ice age. Long answer to a short question. Yeah?
What stage in the age of time did it start raining?
Oh, when did it start raining? There used to be an idea in creationist circles that it didn't rain until the flood. And that was an idea that was sort of very popular and explored a lot. And they refer to Genesis chapter 2, I think, that there was no rainfall on the earth. There was a mist that came up. Is that what you're thinking of? And it says, because there was no man to till the ground. Right, so that's why it says that it was like that. And so the general thinking these days is that after the man was created and once things got going, it did rain before the flood. And so when God created the rainbow, when of course it involves rain to make with the light, that there's sort of the argument is, or the explanation is, that God is choosing something which, although it already existed, he's choosing that now as the sign of his covenant. Similar to the way Jesus used bread and wine as the sign of the new covenant. So that's the argument. So the idea is that it rained before the flood and not long after man was created. Yeah? Yes?
Isn't that point parts of the Ark in Turkey?
That's Mount Ararat. There's been various reports. A few years ago, 5 years ago or something, there was a big thing in the headlines about discovering the Ark. And Carl Whelan, who was the CEO at the time, he actually traveled to Hong Kong. There were some Hong Kong people involved to check out the evidence, and he did quite a bit of work in it. And he's written a big article about it. And the conclusion that we came to is that we think that the guides in Turkey who were taking the Hong Kong people to this Ark, this place, they're actually scamming them, and we don't think that that was really discovered. So there you go. So you can look up that article on about the Ark expose. It'd be nice to discover it, wouldn't it? It'd be really nice, but I'm not aware of it having been discovered to date. And there's been various locations where people have looked on mountains of Ararat, on the Zagros Mountains and other places. So there's a lot of articles on our site for that. Yes, sir?
Is there evidence to suggest that the atmospheric pressure was larger before?
Yeah, so that's another idea that's floats around, the idea that there was a vapor canopy, and those sort of sound very radical ideas. And they talk about a hyperbaric chamber. Have you heard of that? And there's various benefits of that. There's been other people who've modeled the atmosphere and found that if the atmospheric pressure was higher, then it would cause the Earth's surface temperature would increase because of the high atmospheric pressure, and that it wouldn't be really possible to live on the Earth. So we don't use those sorts of explanations and stories because we're not really 100% sure of them.
Tell the children the earth is.
How old can we tell the children the Earth is? So it depends on the age. I always like to get with the kids, I go to Genesis chapter 5. It's got the genealogy there. And there's one verse in chapter 11, which talks about how old Noah was when he entered the ark. And I get them to get a bit of paper and write down all the ages and calculate it themselves and how long it was between Adam and the flood. And that was about 1,656 years, something like that, between Adam and the flood. And so the age of the earth is around, we always say round about 6,000 years, roundabout. So you can't actually pin it down. There's some Bible verses which are a little bit ambiguous, but it's sort of plus or minus, 50, 100 years, something like that.
Calculations on how many people were on Earth at the flood.
Yes. Well, since the flood, how long has it been since the flood? 4,500 years ago. How many people were alive at that time? 8. You can do a little calculation and you find out that the population of the earth today is something about 7 billion, 7.5 billion or something like that. And you find that the amount of time since the flood fits in with that. It's quite reasonable. It's not reasonable if humans started evolving 2 million years ago. Where are all the people? So the time frame of the biblical time frame for the flood is quite reasonable, and it wouldn't have been trillions of people before the flood. I'd have to do the calculation, but you're talking. Yeah. So you would have had to have a lot of factors like that to get that big number. Yeah. Yeah. It wouldn't, yeah, up the back.
What's the gap theory and what's the counter-argument to it?
Well, the gap theory, it's an idea that, see, when the new geology came about, like the geologists in the early 1800s, the ideas of geology came about where they talked about the earth being no sign of, no vestige of a beginning, no sign of an end. They talked about the idea that the earth is immeasurably old, eons old, that came in. And so many Christians, well-meaning Christians, thought, well, what are we going to do? And so they came up with the idea that between Genesis 1 verse 1 and Genesis 1 verse 2, that you could put a gap in there. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and there was a gap. So between that and then it says, then the new creation starts, so that you can put billions of years in there. But the trouble is, you've got all these dead things that are buried in rock layers, and so it indicates that it wasn't a good world, that it was a world which was destroyed and it was full of dead things. And also, that's the geologic record. And also, there's a lot of things which were destroyed in this so-called gap theory, which God created again, like trilobites and other sorts of things, which God created them again, and other things which He didn't. So why did He recreate some things and not others? So it really doesn't make sense. And also, you put all the fossils in there, whereas what did the flood do? So you've got a problem with the flood. Is a flood that created no evidence, So that's the problem with the gap theory. And that was invented back in the 1800s by a Presbyterian minister called Chalmers or something like that. Is that all good? Did I answer that? Hopefully. So you're all good? Full of energy? You had enough? There you go. I haven't, but I do find that my wife sort of runs out of steam before I do. I blame her a lot, don't I? I'll have to stop that.
It's being taped, so it's all right. She can
That's all right.
Thank you, Taz. Thanks very much. Well,
good on you.
I'm sure that you'll be available for somebody to